So welcome back. This is Night Flight, and today Dr. Judd Burton is back, and our topic will be demonology, the study of demons. And we will see where this subject is going to take us. So good to see you, Judd, and welcome back.
Good to see you, Judith. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. I read you have two articles now, one about a particular demon. I forgot his name. And one a concise summary. So so that everybody is on the same page, because some la 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 sometimes we hear a term and we have a certain image in our head. What is an acceptable explanation of a demon for you in your book? What would you say?
Well, looking at it through the lens of the Bible, and there's certainly, each culture is going to define demon in a slightly different way, but there are some core characteristics to the demon, just looking at it comparatively, ethnologically, but looking at it from the source material of the Bible and the associated Second Temple period Jewish literature. Demons are a spirit, they're a disembodied spirit of one of the not solely, but one of the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the pre-flood giants. And then you have post-flood tribes like the Rephaim and the Anakim, whose spirits ostensibly also become demons. Now, the prevailing idea throughout much of Christian history, let's say between about 400 AD to about 1600 AD, was that demons were basically fallen angels or fallen Elohim, part of the divine council that rebelled against Yahweh. And while those entities have similar, let's say, political and spiritual objectives, they're a different kind than the demon. And there are two things, to my mind, that make this make sense. The first is the sort of judgment that's handed down to the Nephilim in the pre-flood world in books like the Book of Enoch, that talk about this coming deluge as a punishment for what the Watchers and the Nephilim had done to humanity. That their bodies would be destroyed, but their spirits would remain to basically placate and depredate against humanity, to try and seek their flesh, that they would always be hungry and thirsty, but never able to sate those appetites. And there's this connotation that they're ritually impure. And that to me is very interesting. And it brings up the second reason why I think that this definition makes sense, is because throughout the New Testament, one of the prevailing terms that's used to describe demons is unclean spirits. And that's the exact phraseology that's used in Enoch when it says that the giant spirits will be unclean spirits upon the earth. It says that verbatim. So the same phraseology is being used between those two worlds, the Second Temple period Jewish world and the early Christian world. And so if we walk it through all of that material, then the demon then becomes this, not just a fallen angel, but it's actually a separate kind of entity. It's the actual spirit of one of these dead giants.
Mm-hmm. So when you say disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the Nephilim, as we know, are the progeny of fallen angels and human women.
Mhm.
But that is not their fault.
Mm.
It's not my fault that I have the father and mother that I do have. It's not my fault that I was born
Sure.
here in Germany. So, is it obligatory for a Nephilim to become a demon, or is there something else that has to happen?
Well, that seems to be the natural flow of things, at least according to the judgment that was handed down to them in Enoch, because it
Mhm,
wasn't simply a matter of their pedigree, like
mhm,
you were pointing out, that they had no control over who their parents were, but it was the culture of license and despotism that emerged amongst them. In other words, it was their very behavior that garnered the punitive measures that were taken against them, and so that's the sort of organic flow that produces a demon. In other words, so it's not that it's necessarily um, obligatory just because of their pedigree, just because of their parentage, but in fact, their behaviors, their culture, their actions were
mhm.
the means. In other words, if you, and it is sort of presented as kind of a judicial sort of process, because Enoch is he's really kind of the court reporter or bailiff all rolled into one person, because he's the one who's reading off this judgment after the watchers had actually tried to petition Yahweh, to maybe rethink things and maybe give them another shot or whatever. But ultimately, this is the judgment that's handed down upon them because of what they did, not because of who their parents were.
So theoretically, if a Nephilim would have decided, sorry, I'm not going down that road of oppression, exploitation, and destruction.
Mhm.
So then that Nephilim could have been spared.
I suppose on
Mhm,
the the extreme end of the hypothetical situation, it's
mhm.
hard to be able to jump in the time machine and go back and quantify that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
um, I would think that would be such a if such a thing happened, I would think that would be such a glaring exception to the rule that it would stand out in the remnant evidence that we have left to us in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I
so
looked, and for instance, when I prepared for this interview, I looked up also demons in Hinduism,
mhm,
demons in Buddhism. They have a totally different approach.
mhm,
And in
mhm,
Hinduism, it appears that demons can convert and they can, yeah, turn around and become a worshiper of, yeah, what do I know, Vishnu, Krishna, whatever.
sure.
And so, but our understanding is more along the lines of once a demon, always a demon, correct?
Yes,
Mhm,
but as you point out, um, there's variation on that theme in world culture.
mhm,
The even in the proximate cultures to the ancient Near East, like the Greek world, you had daimon, from which we take the word demon, daimonia, and eudaimon. There were these spirits of sort of let's say fluid ethics and morality, who might be inspirational for one person, like Socrates was always talking about, this eudaimon, as his inspiration. And of course, Greek mythology is littered with these kinds of ethically and morally fluid, kind of lower order spirits.
Mhm.
And so there's a kind of similarity in the orientation there. But the concurrent thing that runs throughout all of, let's say comparative demonology, is that these are typically spirits that don't have your best interest in mind. In fact, they have typically the exact opposite of that.
Mhm. So when you say that it is more or less their actions that
Mhm.
condemn them to become disembodied spirits and ultimately demons, would that mean that if a human is wholeheartedly dedicated to a way of death and destruction and oppression, could become a demon as well?
There doesn't seem to be any theological underpinning to come to that conclusion. So I would say
Mhm.
probably not. Um, but this is a topic of of some recent discussion, in these sort of circles about, you know, were there, are there ghosts? Are there human spirits? Um, is there room for that in a kind of Western context, a Judeo-Christian context? And some of that would depend, I think, on uh, the theology of the afterlife. What I mean by that is that um, it's not that the Old Testament authors, for instance, that they didn't think that you couldn't communicate or talk with the dead, because ostensibly they were in some sort of um, the equivalent of a five-star hotel while they waited to go to paradise, or await judgment in another place. Um, the idea was that those human spirits were reachable, but there was such a heavy prescription against doing that. In other words, necromancy in ancient Hebrew culture was a capital offense. You didn't do that, and there were there was the really overarching reason is that the Rephaim, or the whose name translates to the dead ones or the wraiths, were these dead ancestor kings that lived in the underworld, who often paraded themselves as human spirits. And so by crossing that veil, by trafficking with those spirits, communicating with them, you were you were more than likely to be communicating with one of these demons rather than a human spirit. And so that prescription, you know, that prohibition is seen all throughout the legal material that's in the Old Testament, like the Torah. Um, so it's not that there isn't a belief in a kind of a ghost, but they're basically in a kind of waiting tank. And I've heard it explained uh, under the terms of Sheol. I've heard it explained under, um, at least in the New Testament context, when Jesus is on the cross and he tells the one thief that asks him to remember him when he goes into his kingdom, he says, "This day you will be with me in paradise," which would seem to allude to not heaven directly, but a good place. In other words, a kind of Eden, if you will, a kind of walled garden that you would wait in before going into it. And so that's a discussion that I've seen pop up, you know, under a number of circumstances, podcasts, views, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But I would say that in most cases, the the prohibitions against necromancy have to do largely with these demons who are basically um, uh, sort of embracing their theatricality in trying to delude or deceive people, which is also part of the modus operandi, if you will, of the demonic world.
Yeah. Okay. So I browsed a little bit on Bible Gateway, and when I typed in the word demon, yeah, there came, I don't know, 3 or 4 Bible verses in the Old Testament. And then with the New Testament, you get swamped with
Right.
scriptures about demons. So what happened there? Why is this not consistent?
Well, the word that's used for demon in the Old Testament in most cases is ob, and it's related to, in other words, it's it's morphologically, linguistically similar to words like Absu, which is the abyss in Mesopotamian mythology, this watery underworld where the spirits of the dead ancestor kings live. They're dead god kings. These would have been the Rabbah in Mesopotamia, which of course is phonetically similar to Rephaim. It's a word that's similar to that, and so the connotation is that this Ob was one of these spirits from the underworld, one of these dead ancestor kings, the Rephaim in this case. There's also there's a city in the ancient Near East and which what would have been northern Mesopotamia, where Turkey and Iraq kind of meet, in Syria. It's that kind of confluence border. The city of ancient city of Urkesh, which was a Hurrian city, they had something called an Abi, which is again phonetically related to Absu and Ob in the Hebrew Bible. The Abi was a necromantic ritual pit. It was meant to mimic. It was part of their cult of the dead, but it was meant to mimic this underworld that was part of ancient Near Eastern mythology in general, and specifically Mesopotamian mythology. And so it's not that it's not that there weren't, obviously ancient Near Eastern peoples had a very keen sense that there were demons. Otherwise, you wouldn't find incantations and spells against them, and prescriptions against them, and talismans that were used against them. It's not that they didn't know of their existence. It was just sort of like it was so well known that because of the audience that these books were being written to, you didn't have to beat that drum, so to speak, over and over again. So they would have been familiar. Now, you do bring up an interesting point about how there are these scant references in the Old Testament, and then in the New Testament, references to demons just explode.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably the clearest explanation for that is that Jesus arrives on the scene, and they recognize that there's something different about this person, that potentially he could be, the Mashiach, the anointed one, that the Hebrews have been waiting for. And if you look at the history of giants, they situated themselves in the ancient Near East and the ancient Levant, because they had a general idea of what was coming down the road. They didn't have the complete picture, but they knew that something was going to happen. And so, in the same way, their disembodied spirits, the demons, stayed in that region. And when Jesus arrives on the scene, their activity becomes exponential. And so that you do have a lot of incidences of people who are afflicted, in one way or another by demons. Whether that's through some sort of physical affliction, or they're just visibly distraught because of their activity. they clearly knew that there was, that is, the demons, they clearly knew that there was something different about Jesus, because they recognized him as the Son of Man, and they thought that the time of their judgment, their second judgment, had come. Um, so that's really kind of the touchstone for the increase in activity that gets recorded, and it's not just something that's happening in first century AD Palestine. It's something that's happening throughout the larger Greco-Roman world at the time, because you can read the records of every rite, every cult to any deity that you can imagine, and they talk. There seems to be an increase of this kind of activity even within that scope. And I'm thinking specifically of um, the god Pan. There seem to be more pilgrimages beginning in the Hellenistic period to shrines to Pan and Pan's grottos. People would go to Pan's shrines and temples and try to
Pandemic.
yeah, well, they would try to uh, uh, sleep away or dream away the spiritual affliction. There was something called panalepsy, which
Mhm.
probably did include epilepsy in the ancient world, but there seems to be a ramping up of that kind of, at least recorded, activity going on during the Greco-Roman period.
Mhm. So these days, in general, the idea of demons or spirits, or let's say supernatural things, is pretty much frowned upon. It's like, yeah, yeah, there are demons. Okay, here's your jacket. Yes, it has the sleeves in front. Um, so why is that? Why is it so hard for people to imagine that there might be something that is beyond their vision?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, we're living in a world that's post Enlightenment, right? So we have, um, during the Enlightenment period, empiricism became the guiding research trajectory, and things spiritual, things supernatural, sort of get shoved to the margins, and that sort of questioning. And of course, that leads to, in the following century, the overarching materialism and naturalism that comes to dominate not just the hard sciences, but the humanities and social sciences as well. And it's only been a force multiplier as the centuries and decades have gone on. So much so that um, the supernatural explanation, or, or or the notion that the supernatural could offer any insight into into observable phenomena, still is pushed to the margins. And so there's that aspect of it. And as you point out, um, in any sort of abnormal or aberrant behavior, the default is to immediately contextualize it within clinical or diagnostic terms. So let's look for, and I'm not saying that there's not merit to that. There certainly is. We owe a lot to the fields of psychology and psychiatry, but that's the default. Let's try and find out if there's a diagnosis in the whatever the latest diagnostic and statistical manual is. I think it's number 5. You won't find demons in that. You won't find anything supernatural in that. It's all clinical and diagnostic. Case in point, last week I read an article about students in a school setting who were using a Ouija board.
Mhm.
Now, Ouija board being this sort of medium focus to communicate, ostensibly to communicate with the dead. And there were 28 of these students that essentially got very distraught and disturbed and began to act aberrantly. And so they were taken to a hospital where they were diagnosed as having anxiety. Well, it's well documented that the experiences that people have with Ouija boards are not altogether positive. In fact, I think if you look at both the well, if you look at the accounts that have been reported of people, more of them are disturbing than not, I should say. And the fact that you have, well, number one, what were they doing with this thing in a school setting? And number two, this illustrates the point that I was making is that this behavior that was caused in the wake of using a Ouija board was immediately categorized within psychological terms. They called it anxiety. That was how it was diagnosed. It never entered into the discussion that perhaps there was a supernatural catalyst for why these students were acting the way that they did. In other words, the demonic, the possibility of the demonic didn't even enter into the discussion, despite the fact that you've had people studying and recording the interactions that people have had with Ouija boards for decades at this point.
Mm. Yeah, it's really amazing how often the subject of balance comes up in all of this. Um, you know, I certainly do not agree that everything bad that is happening is done by demons. Yeah, we
Sure.
are capable of very bad choices sometimes,
Right.
sometimes self-destructive. Yeah, and if I eat a crappy diet and I do not take good care of myself, not of my mind, not of my body, not of my spirit, yeah, I don't even need a demon, yeah, to
Sure.
destroy me any further. So there is that side, but on the other hand, saying that there is absolutely nothing like that is as extreme, you know, the same extreme in another direction. So once again, we should have a little bit of balance. That would be something that would suit us very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of room for the supernatural. Now, you make a good point too. Um, it doesn't behoove us to look for a demon under every rock, because
Yeah.
we can make bad decisions all on our own. And in fact, um, this is part of the subtext of C.S. Lewis's famous book, The Screwtape Letters.
Yeah.
You know, where this elder demon is advising his younger trainee that, you know, basically let these people make their own mistakes and they'll do a lot of your work for you. And
Yeah.
in a similar kind of logic, yeah, humans are capable of their own kind of wickedness and evil without the help of demons. But that doesn't mean that demons can't weaponize or utilize our own mistakes. And so they certainly can swoop in and take advantage of those situations. And so, yeah, it's not very practical to look for, you know, a demon behind every corner, as it were. But at the same time, it's not very practical to completely ignore their possible and in many cases likely interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of our choices actually can develop into a portal for contact with demons. Let's say drug abuse, alcohol abuse. Yeah, I'm not talking about somebody has a glass of wine with dinner. That is not what I'm talking about. But
Right.
I'm talking here hardcore alcoholism,
Mm-hmm.
passing out, you know, just
Mm-hmm.
you know, on the lawn in front of the door or whatever. And
Uh-huh.
do you know the work of Jerry Mazinski?
The name sounds familiar. I don't know that I'm familiar with his work.
He has worked in mental hospitals. He has worked in prisons, and predominantly with people that were labeled schizophrenic. And he, after a while, recognized that it doesn't make sense that they say it is all hallucination, because he recognized that when he listened to some of the people, that it really sounded as if he is listening to one side of a telephone conversation. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And hallucinations usually do not work that way. They are all over the place. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And his conclusion was, yeah, these are demonic attacks. And then he was one of the first who asked the people, what are these voices telling you? Yeah, because nobody ever took that seriously. So, and yeah, of course, that was that was not very good for him, and people didn't like it that he took that seriously. But he also mentioned that there was a certain drug. I don't know what. Doesn't matter. But this particular drug was where people had, after a while, the most horrifying encounters with these voices. Not that necessarily that they saw them, but what they could hear. And so I think if we are stupid enough to go down that road of destruction, be it by drugs or whatever it is, we can involuntarily sometimes open a portal to demons.
Yeah, I think so. There's, as I pointed out a moment ago, our behavior and our mistakes can sort of be weaponized in that respect.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of, almost unconscious, we might do that, which has always prompted me to be more vigilant, about, if anything, that should be like a behavior modifier, to use a clinical term, in terms of the way we conduct ourselves. Because the other end of the spectrum is that there are, systems of prescribed rituals to create these portals. Where, in other words, where people are actively seeking to either communicate with demons or enlist their help, and of course, this is an idea that is millennia old, if not older. This really goes back to prehistory, and the very, the kind of awakening to the supernatural reality of the world. And so, we live in such a materialized, naturalistic world now, in terms of most people's view, that the supernatural doesn't even, enter into the 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 question in terms of the possibility of something like a portal, the possibility of how to how demons actually interact with humans, what the confluence and trafficking, um, what the trafficking is like between humans and demons. So there are a lot of variables at play.
Yeah. So would you say that in general we have to open up in some shape or form to get in contact with demons? that there is
Well,
a part that we need to play?
I think so. Just in terms of the well, most interactions with demons have to do with an oath. In other words, there's a kind of legal permission that's given. Now, in a ritual context, whatever tradition that happens to be in, that's done with intent. And I'm not saying that people necessarily enter into interaction with demons, unwillingly. But there are certainly behaviors, and let's just say repetitive behaviors, repetitive bad behaviors, repetitive, whatever appellation descriptor you want to use, wicked, evil, whatever. When they become repetitive, then they enter into the realm of ceremonialism and ritualism. And then it becomes, then that legal standing, that legal bearing that the demon might have, then becomes a clearer pathway into that interaction, so that they can begin to not necessarily possess a person, but they can begin to placate and or hamper and molest in some way people who sort of make these continual repetitive infractions.
Mhm. Um, but some people appear to make contracts to, yeah, let's say, enhance their career or whatever goal they might have. And
Mhm.
it appears to work, at least for a while. So it might not always be totally destructive right from the get-go. I mean, what is the end of that story? That's a
Mhm.
different book, yeah. But we know that yeah, some people allegedly sold their soul to Satan or to whatever entity. So is there, and if I think, I read Goethe's Faust, Dr. Faustus, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I read that. So is there an element of, yeah, let's say, this is the road that I use to make it go my way?
Well, yeah, I mean that's what I meant when I was talking about the sort of ritual pact,
Mm-hmm.
that's the Faustian deal that you allude to. This shows up again and again and again over multiple religious traditions throughout human history. Is something as um, in America, there's the story of the birth of the blues, and Robert Johnson was probably one of the founders of modern blues music. And the story was that he went to this crossroads. There's a song called Crossroads that he wrote. He was covered by Clapton and Cream back in the '60s, and has been covered by everybody since then. But this song tells the story of him going to the crossroads and making this deal with the devil, that if the devil, granted him fame and notoriety, if as a guitarist, as a blues man, uh, then he would sell him his soul. This legal compact uh, is really at the heart of demonic interaction between humans and demons. And so that's the sort of extreme end, or there's an intent and often a prescribed ritual context for this to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as I pointed out also a moment ago, our very behaviors, those bad behaviors, unethical behaviors, moral behaviors, if they become repetitive, they they sort of fall into this ritual cycle, so that an almost implicit pact is being made. But that legal permission is always, it always has to be there in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Have you found in your studies a hierarchy of demons?
There is a hierarchy, and I would say that not only with my research, but
Mhm.
I'm following in the footsteps of religious historians and demonologists who have looked at this hierarchy. I think some of the most innovative insights into understanding that hierarchy, from the top down, on all of its levels, has come from work from people like the late Dr. Michael Heiser, who talked about this, um, talked about the divine council model as part of the um, hey, Judith, can we pause recording real quickly?
Yes, of course,
Is
no
that possible?
problem.
I'm sorry.
So, yeah, you were talking about Dr. Michael Heiser or something.
Yes. Dr. Heiser did such good work with the divine council model. Not something that he necessarily came up with, but he definitely articulated it well, for the rest of us, I think. And in just in terms of thinking about the the supernatural realm as a kind of hierarchy, looking at the heavenly host, the angels, if you will, as not just this monolithic group of choirs of singing fat babies, but um, a very diverse population of celestial beings. That there was a pecking order, um, and there were archangels and seraphim and cherubim and watcher angels and all kinds of variation in form and function. There's an inner council, a divine council that Yahweh has, that are his inmost angels, ostensibly comprised of uh, archangels and watchers, and then who are often referred to as Elohim. There were Elohim who were placed over the nations under this sort of geopolitical system. You might call it a divine geopolitical system. Some of them were loyal to Yahweh. Most of them were not. Eventually, they sided with this political coup that takes place. And then you have the kind of Genesis 6 Mount Hermon event, with the first mating of these fallen angels who were watcher angels for the most part, with human females, and then you have the Nephilim, and then from that line spring the multiple orders of demons from the various tribes and clans of giants that populated the ancient world. Um, so there is a hierarchy, there is a pecking order. Now I should say that even before I discovered Dr. Heiser's work, I had the opportunity of actually befriending him and working with him on a number of projects, and he was just a fantastic scholar and wonderful human being. But even before I ran across Heiser's work, um, work by people like Jeffrey Burton Russell, who wrote a multi-volume series of works on the devil and on demons, uh, really, I think, has written one of the most comprehensive works on the subject. Has also helped to further explicate and flesh out, what that taxonomy looks like, what that hierarchy of demons, fallen entities looks like. So yeah, the short answer to that question is that yes, there is a hierarchy, but we're still getting our bearings on what exactly that looks at. We're certainly in a better position just in terms of scholarship now than say we were even 10 or 15 years ago.
Mhm.
But you know, that's just looking at it from the lens of the Bible. You know, if you look at demonology from the sort of comparative religious perspective, the same thing is true there. There does seem to be a hierarchy of of malevolent entities and demons. Um, you know, just well, still in Western tradition, just look at our Greco-Roman inheritance. There was certainly a clear idea of a pecking order of demons and lesser spirits and demigods and lesser gods, uh, prevalent in particularly amongst the Greek peoples, and eventually the Romans once they adopted a lot of the Greek ideas about religion.
Mhm. Um, let me briefly share my screen.
Okay.
Yeah, that is not what I wanted to share.
So some YouTube stats.
Yeah, here. This is a Buddhist approach,
Mm-hmm.
and it starts out here by saying, as long as there is an ego, there are demons. When there is no more ego, there are no more demons. And then we have this scene here where Shakyamuni is sitting under the Bodhi tree and is attacked by the hordes of Mara. Mara is a demon that sent all his hordes to, yeah, let's say ultimately distract him. Sometimes with seduction, sometimes with fear, as we can see here, death, and then, yeah, a lot of entities that are not looking very benevolent. And
Not very
as it,
wholesome.
yeah, yeah. And as it says here, Buddha sits unperturbed under the Bodhi tree. And there is also another here it says, for instance, in fact, we might say that in Buddhist understanding, there really are no such things as demons. There are only powers, energies, and deities to be worked with the skillful, the skillful compassion and attainment of the practitioner determine the outcome of the encounter. Is there room in your mind that it might be, yeah, something where our mind becomes hyperactive in some
Well,
cases?
I think that I think that that sort of takes us into the realm of, again, psychiatry and psychology.
Mm-hmm.
That those sort of, you know, bad behaviors can we create our own, you know, the phrase we create our own demons sometimes. um I think that that's certainly true, and it happens, you know, just because it's part of the human condition, I think, in a lot of cases. And um in the case of Buddhism, um you know, the emphasis is on the ego, and that these Mara are extensions of that, of the the um, the deficits of the ego, so much so that the, you know, as you're probably familiar with, the main tenets of Buddhism push you towards ego death. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that you're completely selfless. Those are That's part of what the Eightfold Path in Buddhism is supposed to accomplish. Um, and depending on which tradition, you know, whether it's if it's Theravada Buddhism, which tends to be more naturalistic, and more agnostic, not necessarily defining a god, but a kind of
What did you
spirituality.
say? Theravada? Hinayana? Theravada?
Uh, yeah, Theravadan Buddhism
Yeah. Okay.
is the more not atheistic, but more agnostic
Mm,
style. Then you that projection of the ego, creating demons is a concept that's central to that. But in other traditions like Mahayana, which is more theistic, there's a whole panoply of of
mm,
good spirits and bad spirits. Um, and so on the one hand, you know, that idea in Theravada Buddhism sort of jives with the clinical or psychological interpretation of bad behaviors, but it doesn't explain outside supernatural intelligences that also seem to be affecting human behavior. Um, so I would say that's in my estimation, um, the Buddhist idea seems to line up more with the psychological idea, um,
yeah.
and the Judeo-Christian tradition. Um, not peripheralizing the psychological, the psychiatric, but also acknowledging that there are active intelligences that seek to do us harm. In other words,
Mm. Yeah. I practiced Vajrayana for quite a while, for a
mm-hmm,
couple of years, and so it is that the Buddha always gave different teachings to different
mm-hmm,
students.
sure,
The approach was that it makes no sense if the student can hold 500 mil to trying to give him 1000 milliliters.
mm-hmm,
Doesn't make any sense. So and that is how the different schools popped into
right,
existence.
right,
Theravada, Hinayana is basically the same. It's a different word. It's the minor vehicle where Buddha
right,
gave the teachings about karma, cause and effect. Yeah.
mm-hmm,
So, and Mahayana, and then he gave that to those students who had more, yeah, let's say, compassion also for others. Yeah. So
mm-hmm,
he not only gave cause and effect teachings, he also gave the teachings about compassion. And then in Vajrayana, that works practically via identification, meaning
mm-hmm,
you fake it until you make it. You meditate on that specific Buddha aspect um, until you become like that. Yeah, that was. It is said that that is the fastest way. Be that as it may, I dropped it as well. And yeah, but there you are correct when you say it's more a psychological approach, because the Buddhist approach to evilness is ultimately that evilness is a result of confusion. You do something where you think you have, yeah, it is good for you, it brings your career forward, but you have to sacrifice on the way the well-being of your family, of other people, and you have to be reckless. And you might think for a while that was the way to go, and it might also work for a while, but you lack the awareness of the ripple effects that
mm-hmm,
your actions have, and sooner or later it will fall back on you.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. And
mm-hmm,
so Yeah, and I would say that that is a big difference, that in Buddhism, confusion is being seen as one of the things, yeah, lack of awareness and confusion is the root of what we call evil.
Mm.
Yeah. So we have a very special type of demons, the 72 Goetia demons.
Mm-hmm.
And that also goes along with Solomon and Solomon's temple.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I know that is not biblical. I know that is,
Well, but the number 72 is recurrent,
yeah,
in terms of
yeah.
these fallen entities. Yeah. Um, and that's a number that shows up in all kinds of thaumaturgy and ritual magic as well.
Yeah.
So it's almost a perennially significant number, not just for the sake of numerology, but it seems to be significant for this topic that we're talking about today, for demonology.
Yeah. Um, but honestly, how does that work? That you manipulate demons to build the temple?
Oh, in the case of the legends about Solomon,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's this long-standing system of legends that have grown up, not just about Solomon, but also about David too, that
Mm-hmm.
supposedly they were able to, um, they were able to control demons, that they were able to, um, and when you consider that, particularly in the case of David, who was routinely engaged in battle with the giants, specifically the Rephaim and the Anakim. He was sort of going toe to toe with the sort of, I don't know, larval stage of demons, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then of course the stuff about Solomon that grew up around his reputation, um, created this whole other iteration of not just legendarium, but um, ritual magic. There's a Solomonic system that's not necessarily directly related to the biblical tradition. But there are some interesting things. I was talking with someone the other day about um, Psalm 82, which is, it's part of the Davidic tradition. Um, but what's interesting about it, beyond its inclusion in a collection of psalms, is that copies of it were found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran,
Mm-hmm.
um, in a particular jar canister. Um, the the other scrolls that were found were all exorcism literature. And when you go back and look at Psalm 82 comparatively with these other documents, Psalm 82 was an exorcism psalm. So there's part of that, there's a historical nugget of truth, to that in the Davidic line, there there they were they had a kind of authority over demons. And when you consider that Jesus came from the Davidic line, you know, and you look at the absolute authority that he exercised over demons, not to use a pun, but he he was sort of like the apex of that Davidic tradition, that Masonic line, of being able to have ultimate authority, not just a kind of ritualistic authority, but an ultimate authority over the demons. Because when they came in contact with them, they were terrified. They were like, "Are you here to throw us in the pit? Are you here for the final judgment? Have you returned to send us where we belong?"
Mm.
So it is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Let's say it happened that way, although, yeah. But on the one hand, we have very strict restrictions. For instance, the Ark of the Covenant, only a specific group of people were allowed to touch it, and the one who wanted to hold it from slipping away, he was punished because he was not of the right tribe. And then it's okay when demons build the temple to the Most High.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, that's why I say so much of that is legendary. I think not Carlo Ginsburg, what's his name? Lewis Ginsburg. I think he writes a little bit about that in his Legends of the Jews. But some of those ideas about Solomon's use of demons to construct the temple are much later iterations.
Yeah.
They're certainly non-canonical, but even more than that, they're part of the legends that emerge really beginning in late antiquity, and especially what you find in medieval rabbinical traditions of Judaism. So they're comparatively late um, in terms of their emergence on the historical time.
Mm.
Not that they don't, again, not that they're not culturally or historically relevant, because they tell us something about Jewish communities at the time in late antiquity and medieval period, but they sort of, they at least give you pause, especially when you hear about things like this copy of Psalm 82 that was found amongst the exorcism scrolls at Qumran. So there's definitely room for more research and more work to be done in that respect. But I think for the reasons that you just outlined, a large portion of those legends belong exactly where they are in the legendarium, and not as part of the canon narrative.
Mm. So would you also draw the line there between legends and mythology, or is there no difference?
Well, again, just as with these legends about Solomon and David, there's that nugget of historicity
Mhm.
that you find, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing can be said about mythology. Um, the city of Troy that we thought was just a literary device at one point in time. Well, we
Yeah.
found that and excavated it. Um, Romulus and Remus, we thought that that was just part of the founding myths of ancient Rome, and then we discover that, hey, the first king of the seven kings of early Rome was named Romulus. And so there's always going to be, there's a kind of historicity in mythology and legends, and that's why I think that they're valuable. But we have to be careful in sifting out what is just good storytelling and what is actually historic, what actually happened in real space and time.
Mhm. So, yeah, I remember the name of the demon that you wrote an article on. It's Chemosh.
Oh yes, yeah.
And Chemosh, interestingly enough, one of the translations is a fish god. And there we have a whole array of, for instance, the goddess Cybele. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
she also was known for the fish head.
Mm-hmm.
Not in all depictions, but some of them.
Mm-hmm.
A very evil creature, very
Mm-hmm.
bloodthirsty. Um, and still, up to this day, we have the Pope wearing a fish head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's up with that?
Well,
With
yeah,
these.
exactly. That's a great question. You know, in
Mm.
ancient Mesopotamia, there were a couple of the sages that came to shore um, in this sort of scaly fish type skin. It was like a cloak that they were wearing. And so
Yeah.
you've got that kind of chimeric imagery there. You've got it with Chemosh, you've got it with Dagon. In some instances, there's some debate as to whether that identity belongs to Dagon, but it serves the purpose of illustrating, you know, these attributes. The I'm also thinking about you know, things like the sea goat, the Capricorn, you know, that combines the element of the fish and the goat to it. Um, there does seem to be this, and in a lot of cases, those types of creatures are culture bearers or culture heroes of one sort or another. Um, you know, or they're at least offering elements of culture. So it's a very arcane, foundational kind of idea that may in fact harken back to the earliest of these cities and city states, which seems to be what they were the progenitors of. And I'm doing a word study right now that'll probably end up being a paper, but there is connective tissue between um, the city state or the civilization on the one hand and these celestial entities, culture bearers on the other hand. Not necessarily just the fish human sort of picture, but culture bearers and culture heroes of all kind. But um, the word for one of the words for angels, the watcher angel specifically in the Hebrew Bible is ir, or irim is the plural. It's a direct descendant of the Aramaic word um, irim, which can mean celestial entity or city. And in some uses, variations of Ir in the Hebrew Bible can be used as a kind of fortress or camp. Um, so there seems to be a linguistic connection between the belief in these celestial entities in the ancient Near East and likely the world over, and their role in building civilization and building cities.
Mm. Yeah, I have to say, I would not be surprised if the paper had actually its roots in those fish gods, because, you know,
Well, that
I find pagan symbolism all over that place.
mhm,
Yeah,
mhm,
the pine cone, um, it- what is the obelisk doing there? And then, you
mhm,
know, they go the whole 9 yards and declare Mary to be Queen of Heaven,
mhm.
which was, yeah, the domain of Semiramis, Inanna, Ishtar, Isis.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So it seems to me that they merged a lot of pagan things into their church, and these days um, it's really hard for people to distinguish what is what if they
Mhm,
are not really well studied.
mhm. Yeah, well, there are droves of people that think um, that the papacy um, is it basically transferred the old mystery religions of ancient Mesopotamia
Mhm.
over and adopted a kind of veiled version of their symbology, and are have basically recreated it in real time. Um, there may be some truth to that. Uh, that's that's not to paint the the practitioners of Roman Catholicism in a pagan light necessarily, um, but you,
No, I
the
mean
upper
the
echelon.
institution.
Yes, yes, that's what I was saying. The upper echelons, the actual governing body of the papacy and the Vatican. Um, it's hard not to miss some of those symbols if you even have the most basic kind of schooling in that. Those that you mentioned, the actual accoutrement that the Pope wears, the presence of an obelisk in the Vatican. These are clear, um, uh,
The Red
long-held
Cross of
ancient
Azazel
symbols.
as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you find that on the Pope's robes as well. And isn't it interesting that the institution that calls itself the Red Cross, yeah, they pick you up on the battlefield, stitch you together to send you back into war.
Right.
And yeah, and
Exactly.
they proudly carry the symbol, yeah, of Azazel. And what did that dude bring? Yeah, among other things, sorcery and
And
yeah,
in warcraft.
war
Yeah.
weapons. Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm. Yeah, some people they tell me, yeah, but Azazel brought weapons for our protection. Oh, really?
Really.
So if we didn't have protection from what? Let's say we didn't have any need for weapons in our distant past. How is the introduction of weapons any progress?
Hmm.
It's destructive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the sense of, although it wasn't universal in prehistory, there is evidence in the archaeological record that a lot of our you know our prehistoric societies were comparatively more egalitarian than ours. And now human nature is human nature, so people are always going to find something to fight over. But um, the introduction of metallurgy and the smithing of weapons and something like that was a 90-degree angle change in the kinds of weapons that could be brought to bear. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
when humans, sought to activate each other.
Mm. Yeah. And the Knights Templar wear it proudly as well. Yeah, you
Hmm.
have this the symbol of the Red Cross if you are vigilant, and yeah, you would
Hmm.
see it all over the place. So
Sure.
and yeah, but most people are not very savvy when it comes to decoding symbolism.
Well, it's not I mean, it's not exactly an easy thing to do. You have to put in the time, yeah, as you well know. You've got to put
Mhm.
in the study time, to get some conversancy in the language of symbols. I've often said that our mother tongue is mythology. That's, mythology and symbolism is sort of the universal language that we've all forgotten how to speak and discern. Um, and so, yeah, it takes, what else can you say? On this side of the Atlantic, we call it sweat equity. You've got to put in the work, to actually build up a conversancy in this to be able to recognize the symbols that are hiding in plain sight.
Mhm. Yeah, it's all hidden in plain sight. You just have to
Hmm.
look. Yeah, and
Well, and
there's
that's
all
part of that's
there's
part of
also a
that
lot of
film.
goddess worshipping going on in all religions. Hidden, yes. On the surface, it's always male dominated, but when you
Mm-hmm.
scratch a little bit deeper, there's a lot of
Hmm.
goddess worshipping going on. Mm.
Sure.
Yeah. So, are you afraid of demons?
No, um, cautious about them, yes.
Mhm.
Uh, Aware of their millennia of knowledge at their disposal, yes. But one of the things that Scripture encourages us to be is to not have a spirit of fear. And I don't think that that is, this is something that's echoed all throughout the New Testament in particular. Both James and John, write about it, but it is kind of a central tenet, is to not have a spirit of fear. And I don't think that that's just a random choice of words. There are actual entities that are associated with fear, like the aforementioned Azazel and Pan, hence the word
Hmm.
panic.
Yeah.
And since both of those guys were living in the Greco-Roman world, not far away from arguably the most famous shrine to Pan in the ancient world, at Paneas at Caesarea Philippi, I don't think that they use that phrase flippantly. I think that they're talking specifically about that entity that causes fear, and this is something that demons seem to feed on. They seem to be drawn to, because it's a way for them to get into our lives. It's a way for them to kind of utilize our human frailty, to get into our lives and try and affect it for detriment. Um, so the short answer is no. I'm not afraid of demons because I have a reason not to be afraid, because there's greater authority that can be invoked
Yeah,
over
I'm not
those
afraid
demons.
of them either.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, my goodness, look at yourself. You're stuck
Mhm.
here. Yeah. You're stuck here. And as a disembodied spirit. And actually, I sometimes I don't even know, there are moments when I think it's pathetic. Your existence is pathetic.
Mhm.
Um, Disembodied spirit, yeah, can't make it there, can't make it here. And
Mhm.
then you resort to scaring the shit out of people.
Exactly. Yeah. You get your jollies from making people's lives miserable. Yeah.
Yeah,
Really. I mean, what a pathetic existence.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that way, if you strip it really down, because the scary part, that is, to me, like, um, yeah, riding I don't know how you call that in English. We have here amusement parks where you
Mhm.
go inside and then all types of weird masks and creepy noises and
Oh yeah,
it,
like a haunted house sort of.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
designed to scare you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they to me they appear like that. Yeah.
Hmm.
And if you understand that they I'm not saying that there is no demon who has power. Yeah, I'm not saying that. But if you strip it down, yeah,
Hmm.
from the scary um, appearance, and you look at what it really is, yeah, not really here, not really there. It's really ridiculous.
Hmm. Yeah, and the I think the really terrific cases of demonization, particularly in the modern world, um, they stem from the orders that these, we were talking about the hierarchy earlier. Well, these gods of the nations, that the Old Testament talks about, they still have their regions that they're working, and they're
Mhm.
sort of like the higher, you know, officers in the demonic army, if you will. And I think in a lot of the more severe cases, like there's this new movie coming out now, um, with Russell Crowe as the late, I think the late, I don't think he's still alive, but Father Gabriel Amort, who's the chief exorcist at the Vatican.
Mhm.
Um, you know, the accounts that guys like that who are so actively involved in ministering to people who are placated by demons. Um,
Mm.
I think in a lot of those instances, you've got pretty significant orders coming from higher up in the demonic realm, because of where some of these higher fallen entities are at. You know, they're in prison. They're sort of like a drug lord or a kingpin who might be in prison, but he's still able to run his organized crime ring from the prison. And so he's got all these lower order fallen entities, the demons, to do their dirty work. And when we get these severe cases of demonic possession and demonic oppression, I think that we're looking at very strategic, very structured, you know, well, stratagems. They're military actions, basically, that the demonic realm is taking against humanity. And it shows up not in just something as obvious as, you know, a demonic possession where people are outwardly, you know, showing that they're speaking languages that they've never been trained in. They have enormous strength. You know, they can throw people around that are larger than them. All of these things speak to an entity that's been around and at one time was very physically strong in its flesh. You know, again, the Nephilim contingent explains that to a great degree. But you know, it shows up in like what we're going through right now. You know, with highly centralized, you know, parties of extremely wealthy individuals. You know, these cabals who grew up, you know, they look down on the rest of us. You know, they don't really think that we're necessary to, you know, their plans or what have you. They clearly don't like the rest of us. They think that we're just using up the resources that are somehow theirs by birth or whatever. I think that that's evidence of this targeted sort of demonic activity as well. So again, it all goes back to, you know, how much are people paying attention to what's going on around them? How well are they reading the symbols that are being planted right in front of them on their phones, on their TV screens, at the movie theater, on the radio, on the internet? We're just literally bombarded with it, and it takes a kind of targeted, discerning eye, you know, a kind of spiritual situational awareness, I think, to navigate the waters that we're in right now.
Yeah. And I think these are fantastic last words. In case you have anything that you would like to mention that is important to you that we have not touched upon, now would be the time.
Only to say that I teach coursework on this material, and if people are interested, they can look me up on Facebook, or they can email me at professorburton@yahoo.com.
Okay, good. So, and I will also link your website in the description box, and there under blog they can also find your articles that you wrote about demons. So
the new website is going to be burtonbeyond.net rather than .com.
Okay. But who or what is the website juddburton.com?
Oh, Dr. Judd Burton?
Yeah.
Yes, people can go to that website as well, Dr. Judd.
Okay.
That's
yeah.
That's the new institute page.
Okay. Yeah. Now I understand, because for a second I thought, did I read?
No, so
the
either
articles
one of those.
of
Either one of those is fine.
Dr. Judd Burton. That's okay. So yeah. Yeah, that was it. Night Flight for today with the wonderful Dr. Judd Burton. And we see you all next time. Bye-bye.